So I thought we should kick it off with something not too difficult, not too controversial. I want to talk about the term genocide and how it relates to what's been going on in Gaza in the past half a year. So the first point I would like to make about the genocide debate is that most people, I believe, enter this debate with a very mistaken energy. They treat this as a strictly technical question, as if there's already a single, final, unproblematic definition of the term genocide, and all we have to do is hold up with one hand this definition, hold some phenomenon in the world with the other hand, measure the one against the other, and then just quickly deduce whether we are dealing, objectively speaking, with a genocide or not. This approach is mistaken. The fact is that in scholarship, there is no single universally accepted definition of the term genocide. And the internationally accepted legal definition is ambiguous and it's controversial. The very person who coined and promoted the term genocide, his name was Raphael Lemkin. He was a Polish Jewish lawyer. He was dissatisfied with the definition formulated by the Genocide Convention after World War II. The United States, as well, refused to take part in this legislation. I don't remember what were Raphael Lemkin's objections, but for the US, I believe that the issue was that the word class, the category of class, was not included among the kinds of groups the destruction of which could count as genocide. The definition that was accepted in the convention focused on ethnic, national, religious groups, but not on class. So that the Soviet Union, for example, could not be accused of committing genocide against the Russian and Ukrainian peasantry during its march towards industrialization in the 1930s. By the way, I tend to agree in this case with the American position that something like class should be included as a kind of group to be protected by international legislation from systematic physical destruction. But I don't want to get into these details right now. I'm just trying to convey that we, us modern humans, we're still trying to come to terms with what the word genocide means or what it should be taken to mean. Now, I myself, I don't have a clear-cut definition of the term genocide. But I still think it's an important word. And I believe that what we are trying to grasp when we use this word is a kind of quite modern, I think, dystopian horror of seeing a powerful, centralized industrial state uses all its might, uses all its technology against a defenseless or virtually defenseless human population, even to the point of reconfiguring the demographic landscape in a certain area of the world. Now, how many people or what percentage of the population needs to be threatened with physical destruction before we use the word genocide? I'm not sure. What is the importance of intention in all of this? How do we even measure the intention of a state or of a society? These are difficult questions that we need to discuss, and we need to enter this discussion not with a masculine, arrogant energy, as if this is a strictly technical question, but with wisdom, with humility, with compassion. And we need to remember that language is something that we create, ideally to understand the world and to make life better for us and for other living beings. And I want to invite you to keep this in mind and to kind of cultivate in yourself this kind of energy as we enter the debate about the word genocide and how it might relate to the ongoing assault on the Gaza Strip by the State of Israel. The second point I would like to make about the genocide Gaza debate is that it would be a mistake to only consider the enormous number of human beings who have been eliminated by Israeli fire so far. When we talk about a possible genocide unfolding before our eyes in Gaza right now, we are not only talking about the huge massacre of probably at this point at least 40,000 people, mostly women and children. That is horrific enough, but we're also talking about the almost total destruction of health facilities, of housing, of roads, agricultural lands, bakeries, sanitation, cultural institutions, educational institutions, even monuments with symbolic value. And we're talking about, of course, the ongoing prevention of sufficient food and water and medical supplies from entering the Gaza Strip. Genocide is never an event, okay? It's a process. Genocide is a process in which a policy of creating and maintaining conditions of death for the population under attack is as important and often more important than the direct killing of people by weapons of war. And as this process is unfolded in Gaza, and the Netanyahu regime in Israel is clearly adamant about making this last as long as possible. As long as this is going on, the physical existence and mental sanity of every single girl, boy, man, woman, and animal in Gaza right now is under serious threat due to an ongoing systematic policy, despite the incessant warnings of food and health specialists from around the world. And to me, that alone merits a place for the term genocide in this discussion. The third point I would like to make about the genocide debate is about intent. A lot of Zionist apologists often say that without genocidal intent, one cannot speak of a genocide. And they say the Netanyahu regime does not have genocidal intent with regards to the people of Gaza. It is merely trying to exterminate the Hamas military organization and political movement. The suffering of the civilian population of Gaza is merely incidental to this goal. It is merely collateral damage, which, brings so much pain and sadness into the hearts of Netanyahu and the ministers and the generals. But alas, this is the price to be paid in a holy crusade against pure evil. To this argument, I would like to say several things. First of all, I think it is preposterous to claim that the only goal of the Netanyahu regime in Gaza is to destroy Hamas. It clearly has other more far-reaching goals, more devastating goals. And I want to say something about that in a minute, but first I want to stress that even if it were true that everything that has been done in Gaza has been done with the single goal in mind of exterminating Hamas, even then I believe you cannot say that the destruction of the civilian population has been unintentional, okay? I think we have to differentiate here between intention and ultimate goal, okay? For example, let's say that I take over an enemy village, and let's say that I suspect that guerrilla fighters are hiding in the village, as guerrilla fighters, by definition, are apt to do. And this is true, by the way, of guerrilla fighters in different areas of the world, in different times in history. It's true of Jewish guerrilla fighters in history. This is not an invention of Hamas. Don't believe the propaganda. And let's say that in this village, I cannot tell who among the villagers is a guerrilla fighter and who is not. And let's say that I line up all the men in the village, all the male villagers who appear to me to be between the ages of, say, 15 and 50, and I simply shoot all of them to death. Something that has happened throughout history, something that happened in this country where I am right now, during the year 1948. It was very common then, and we have written orders testifying to this. It was very common that Jewish militias and the Israeli military would kill all the Palestinian men in a certain village. So let's say I did that, or you know what, let's say maybe I don't want to knock on the door and say, hey, all the men outside, or I don't want to come inside and search for men in the village because that puts me at risk. So maybe I just throw a grenade through the window and I blow up everyone in the house, children, women, the elderly, as happens as well in history and as happened here as well in 1948. Or maybe if I have enough firepower, I don't even enter the village. I just bomb the village from afar. And let's say that I am indifferent to the lives of the villagers who are not guerrilla fighters. It is not my ultimate aim to exterminate them. I don't have a genocidal ideology here. Now, I just want to say in parentheses that this is never actually true, okay? If I eliminated the entire village, it cannot be true that I am free of any ill intent towards the villagers. I must harbor some hate, some contempt towards them. I must see them as less than human if I'm willing to exterminate them like this. But let's assume that I'm indifferent to them. And my ultimate aim was simply to get through them to the guerrilla fighters living among them. Now here's my question. Did I kill these people unintentionally? Did I kill these people unintentionally? Of course not. I didn't do this by mistake. I didn't slip on a banana peel and accidentally kill all of them. I knew what I was doing. I knew what the consequences of my actions would be. It was methodical, it was systematic, and I decided to take the lives of the population of a village, or the entire male population of a village. That is, I murdered them. The ultimate aim of this murderous act may have been, I don't know, I may claim to have the loftiest of goals, or maybe my ultimate aim was, you know what, to make my father proud in some sick way, but that's between me and my therapist. In any case, I cannot say that the death I inflicted on this group of human beings was without intention. Similarly, the Netanyahu regime cannot claim to have created and maintained conditions of death for an entire human population without intention. It can only claim that the ultimate aim of this genocide is supposedly to eliminate Hamas, but to me that doesn't change the fact that this is a systematic policy of genocide. The fourth and last point I would like to make about the genocide debate is that clearly the intention of the Netanyahu regime in Gaza goes further than merely the elimination of Hamas. The campaign in Gaza is clearly also a punitive campaign aimed at severely punishing the people of Gaza. It is also a terror campaign aimed to strike fear in Arabs, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and Lebanon. It is also a political campaign aimed to demonstrate to the Jewish citizens of Israel that the Netanyahu regime and its military are capable and willing to avenge the huge failure and humiliation of the 7th of October. And finally, the campaign in Gaza is also aimed at the possibility of a strategic change in the status quo by driving the population of Gaza through the threat and pressure of an unfolding genocide outside the Gaza Strip and into the Sinai Desert. And it is this last point that I would like to focus on right now. And we need a little bit of context. So the Gaza Strip was created as a political geographical unit in 1948. It didn't exist as such before 1948. And at that time, during that year, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were driven out or forced to flee from their villages, their towns and neighborhoods. And many of them ended up in this narrow strip of land with its back against the sea. And from the very beginning, there is a problem of hunger among this population. Not only because it is a population of mostly refugees, but also because that area was then cut off by the new border from the rest of the country and from the agricultural lands on the eastern side of the border. Lands that were appropriated, of course, by the Israeli government for the sake of its Jewish citizens. So the Gaza Strip from the beginning was an economic and social catastrophe, both due to a surplus population that was forced to live in a small area with scarce natural resources, and also because of this artificial cutting off of this area from the rest of the country, with which it had been traditionally economically integrated. So from the beginning, Gaza is a huge refugee camp, and there is pressure on the borders. People are desperate to get out. They cross the border at night in order to join relatives on the other side, or in order to gather food from the fields that had recently belonged to them. And they are shot to death in the thousands by the Israeli military in the years after 1948. This is not controversial in the historiography. This is all based mainly on a research titled Border Wars, a book by Benny Morris. He relies mostly, almost exclusively, on Israeli official documentation. So this is all documented there. And since that time until today, it's really the same story. The people of Gaza want to get out, to get some of their lands back, or at least to be economically integrated on an equal footing, not just as an exploited proletariat, but to be equally integrated with the rest of the country in order to relieve their distress. And the state of Israel, on the other hand, unwilling to give up Jewish supremacy in the distribution of land and power, which is Zionism, does everything it can to keep the people of Gaza closed off in that strip of land and to somehow control this mass of poor, hungry, desperate people, which is, of course, fertile ground for social and political unrest and guerrilla resistance. So the challenge has always been to control these people, keep them back. And when the opportunity shows itself, to get rid of them somehow. This is an ongoing fantasy of Israeli governments throughout the years. So after 1967, there were attempts to resettle some part of the population in South America. This failed. You know, it's very difficult, after all, to resettle a large population. Jewish people should know this from their history. There were times where no country wanted to receive a mass of impoverished Jewish refugees. And similarly here, the population of Gaza, like Palestinians in general, but especially in Gaza, they are a surplus population from the vantage point of the governments of the world. Yeah, these are redundant human beings. They are troublesome. They are a problem simply by virtue of their existence as a human population in a certain place and time. This is a tragedy that Jewish people, I think, should find empathy for, and a lot of Jewish people do find empathy for. Of course, the rest are heavily brainwashed. Now, in 2004, after several decades of direct military occupation, and after two intifadas which shook Israeli society to the core, plans were finally made in Israel to disengage from the Gaza Strip. Up until then, there was some unequal colonial integration across the border. Okay, some inhabitants of Gaza were allowed to work in Israel as a severely exploited proletariat, and on the other hand, Israeli citizens were living in privileged settlements inside the Gaza Strip, and the Israeli military was inside the Strip as well. And this created problems for Israel throughout the years, through popular uprisings and through guerrilla warfare coming out of the Strip and hitting at the very heart of Israeli society. And the decision was then made to cut Gaza off, to disengage and let this population rot in its own filth. Excuse my language, but this is what's happening here. And it was understood that this would cause the economic situation in Gaza to get worse and worse because of the complete cutting off of this area from the rest of the country, and because of the natural multiplication of the inhabitants of this refugee camp. And it was understood that this would escalate, not pacify, but escalate the belligerency of the people of Gaza. There were no illusions that this engagement would lead to peace. That's just propaganda. It was clear, I will show you in a minute, in several quotes, it was clear that the Palestinian plight in Gaza would only intensify because of the worsening of their conditions being closed off. But the advantage of this engagement was seen in that this population would at least be sealed off, and the fighting would be on the border, on the fence, in the south, in the periphery, rather than in Tel Aviv at the center. You see, cutting the Gaza Strip would prevent Palestinian guerrilla fighters from reaching and hurting the more privileged parts of the Jewish population of Israel. Now, yes, they could fire some homemade rockets over the wall. This was expected, but these would be primitive and ineffective. And then the Israeli military would have the freedom to use devastating force against Gaza through air power, through artillery, with less risk to its soldiers, sometimes with complete immunity, just remote control massacres, because after the disengagement, Gaza would be seen by the rest of the world not as occupied territory, but as a kind of foreign state, so that one could savagely bomb Gaza in the same manner one bombs an enemy state in a time of full-scale war. Ariel Sharon, then Prime Minister, he said in Hebrew, Aza tir'ad ve'olam yevin. Okay, Gaza will tremble and the world will understand. But what's the end game of all of this? Okay, so it's going to get worse and worse and worse. What's the end game? The end game would be that the poverty, the hunger, the death and the destruction in this huge walled-off refugee camp would become so severe that the world, meaning the United States, would acquiesce in the transfer of this surplus, troublesome, unwanted population into the Sinai Desert or to anywhere else in the world, and thus finally ridding Israel of this den of snakes, as the Gaza Strip has often been called by Israeli leaders throughout the years. If you don't believe me that this has been the plan all along, I want to read you a quote from an interview conducted in 2004 with a man called Arnon Sofer. Arnon Sofer, he is an Israeli demographer. He dedicated a lot of his research to the Palestinian demographic problem, so-called. And he was one of the people, maybe the main person, to convince then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to adopt the disengagement plan. And I want you to look at what Sofer said in an interview to the Jerusalem Post back in 2004, just as the disengagement from the Gaza Strip was being prepared. So here's a quote of Sofer, and trigger warning, this is going to be very disgusting and racist. So this is Sofer. When 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, I just want to say, this is me in parentheses. Back then in 2004, I think there were about 1.3 million people in Gaza. Today, there's something like 2.5. That is, on the 6th of October, there were 2.3 million people in Gaza. So listen to this prediction made by Arnon Sofer back in 2004. He says this, he's looking into the future, he's looking into now, and he's saying this. When 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe. Those people will become even bigger animals than they are today with the aid of an insane fundamentalist Islam. The pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we will have to kill and kill and kill. all day, every day. The only thing that concerns me is how to ensure that the boys and men who are going to have to do the killing will be able to return home to their families and be normal human beings. Gaza is going to be such a disaster, the US will have to pressure Egypt to cede land. So these are the words of Arnon Sofer, demographer and advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, in an interview to the Jerusalem Post in 2004. And now I want to mention another person. This is very important. I know this is a lot, but this is important. A man called Giora Eiland. Eiland is an Israeli general, and in 2004, the same year, he was head of the Council of National Security. He was appointed to that position by Ariel Sharon. And this man, Giora Eiland, in 2004, he had a conversation with an American diplomat. That conversation leaked through WikiLeaks. You can go to their website and read this conversation. And in this conversation, Eiland, Israeli general, says the following, quote, Gaza alone is already a huge concentration camp. This is 2004. Huge concentration camp. The land is surrounded on 3 sides by deserts. Palestinians need more land, and Israel can ill afford to cede it. The solution lies in the Sinai desert. Now, today, Giora Eiland, as far as I know, does not hold an official position in the state of Israel. But according to Yediot Acharonot, which is a central Israeli newspaper, Eiland is an unofficial advisor to Security Minister Yoav Gallant. And Giora Eiland, this man, several days after the 7th of October, he published an article where he said that Israel should make Gaza unsuitable for human life through diseases, through, I quote, translated from Hebrew, through a man-made humanitarian crisis, so that the population would be forced into the Sinai desert. Another Israeli strategist, a general by the name Hanan Shai, he teaches at the Hebrew University, and he claims that his students are in the high command of the Israeli military today. This man, Hanan Shai, said something very similar about what Israel should do in Gaza. He said this after the 7th of October, and he called it the Chernobylization of Gaza, okay? That is, just as Chernobyl in Ukraine, then the Soviet Union, just as Chernobyl became extremely toxic for all living creatures after a disastrous accident in the nuclear power plant, so should the entire Gaza Strip become a barren, empty, lifeless land. Well, to me, it is clear that the Netanyahu regime, for the past half a year, has been Chernobylizing the Gaza Strip. It has been making the Gaza Strip unsuitable for human life, in the words of Hanan Shai and Giora Eiland. It has been cooking and maintaining conditions of death through a huge massacre, through total destruction, and through prevention of vital resources, while driving the population more and more towards the south, towards the border with the Sinai desert. And this is genocidal. This is the unleashing of a process of genocide in the hopes that this will drive the population into an empty, scorching desert. And we have to keep in mind that most of the people in the Gaza Strip have never seen any other place in the world. Most of them were born and raised and confined their whole lives in this narrow strip of land. This is the only world they have ever known, and they are witnessing, if they are still alive, they are witnessing today the total destruction of this world. There is not a single living creature in Gaza right now who is not experiencing an apocalypse. And this is happening not far from where I'm sitting right now. And I think we lack the vocabulary to communicate just how monstrous and total and dystopian this high-tech campaign of death and terror and physical and mental torture has been, without using something like the word genocide. And that is my case for bringing the term genocide into this discussion.